This week on the Comic Box. I've missed you. Let's catch up, shall we? Bop doom doom dum bop bit a bit a bit beep beep doom doom dum 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 boo do comics. Hey everyone, welcome to the Comic Box, part of the Geek to Geek podcast network. I'm Rob, your friendly neighborhood comic geek, and I have so much stuff for you guys. The last episode I did was the recap of San Diego Comic-Con with Liam, which was awesome, but then I fell into this rut and got a whole bunch of extra work that I was doing in my professional life, and so this is my catch-up episode. So I don't have a topic of the week this week. It is strictly catching up on all of the news, 2 weeks worth of comic book reviews, so let's jump straight in. First of all, we hit 1,000 total downloads for the show. Yay! Woo! Woo! Yeah! Woo! Thanks, crowd of me. Anyway, that is really cool. It's a huge accomplishment for me. So big thanks to Void and Beach for letting me join the Geek to Geek podcast network, and thanks to you guys for not running away and bearing with me as I travel along this podcast journey and hopefully improve every single week. But that said, as always, I want to keep making the show even better. So please keep sending suggestions for topics, for poll lists, for archive suggestions, whatever else. Contact info in the show notes, or as always, I will send it at the end of the episode. Now let's get into some real comic news. Starting over at DC, Geoff Johns, the guy who started out as a writer, writing the Justice Society of America and The Flash, and has continued to work his way up, is now the president of DC Entertainment. So that includes comics, TV, film, everything else. Now previously he was the chief creative officer, and my understanding is he still actually is filling that role. So now he just has added responsibilities. So if he doesn't burn out, this is a good thing in my eyes. In general, I like the things that he's done over at DC. I liked his long run on Green Lantern. And having somebody who loves the comics as much as he does, making decisions for movies and TV, is, from a fan's point of view, definitely a good thing, even if it still means that we got those two most recent Superman flicks. But still have faith. So for all we know, those were in the works before he got invited anyway. In any case, he's reportedly writing the script for the upcoming Batman film with Ben Affleck. So curious to see how that's going to turn out, when and if. Well, we know when that happens. It's not an if. We know they're doing it. But I like that, Affleck, who clearly took the role very seriously, and Geoff Johns, who's just a dude who knows comics. Excited to see those two collaborate and see what comes out of it. Also in DC movie news, Suicide Squad has released. You are not going to get my review this episode. I'm going to hold out. I kind of like the idea of waiting a little bit, plus I haven't seen it yet. But the critics are not being kind. I've seen some positive fan reaction, and then a lot of negative, both fan reaction and critical reaction. But I always say, save judgment, see it for yourself, because you don't know who those fans are, what sort of place they're coming from, and you could have a totally different opinion depending on your history with the characters, or lack of history with the characters. So I'm not going to go in with any high expectations, but I'm also not going to go in expecting it to be absolutely awful either. Moving over to Marvel, still have some stuff from San Diego that Liam and I didn't cover because he and I were very much just talking about trailers. First, we do have an X-Men book. Kinda. Sorta. It's called Inhumans vs. X-Men. It was announced at San Diego Comic-Con. It looks like the X-Men need to destroy the Terrigen Mist to survive. For those that don't know Inhuman lore, in the comics anyway, I can't speak for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. because I don't watch it, but the Terrigen Mists are the supernatural gas that creates Inhumans and gives them their power. So it is now this species versus species war. And just considering it's Marvel putting out the comics, Marvel has Inhumans on TV. For at least a while, Marvel had an Inhumans movie coming out. I wonder who will, quote-unquote, win in the Inhumans versus the X-Men. I'm guessing nobody, because it's comic books, and that's usually the case in these things. But maybe this is what they're going to use as an excuse for not putting out any X-Men books. Deadpool. Hey kids, like Deadpool? Deadpool's doing all sorts of crazy stuff. In Deadpool number 21, they're starting an arc called Shakespool, where he takes on Shakespeare. And then they're doing a new miniseries called Back in Black, where Deadpool apparently had the Venom symbiote before Eddie Brock did. So they're trying to do like this retcon thing where they're inserting Deadpool into that story. So it is going to be set, I think, during the 80s era of Marvel. So it'll have sort of that original Deadpool look to it. I don't know. Also, Negasonic Teenage Warhead, who many of us were introduced to in the Deadpool film, actually an obscure X-Men character, is returning to the comics now in the upcoming Deadpool and is this book already out? Deadpool and the Mercs for Money. One way or the other. Apparently in the comic books, Negasonic Teenage Warhead only was a very small character in the X-Men book and was killed off by Sentinels. So I don't know if that means this is a new character or the same character somehow resurrected. Either way, if you were a fan of Negasonic Teenage Warhead, she is coming back to comics. What else do we got here? Black Panther. He is getting a second comic book called Black Panther, World of Wakanda. That's going to sort of flesh out the character's universe and supporting cast. So, if you dug Black Panther in the movie, or if you're enjoying the current comic book, you're going to get a second series. Which is cool because it means Marvel is totally paying attention to their fans. They're responding to the excitement, they're jumping on the bandwagon, and are doing their best to meet the needs of the fan base, which is finally a good example of comics following the movies, rather than what we usually get, which is they made a movie, it was okay, but now all of the comic books have to change to look and feel like the movies so that new readers will pick them up. This seems like it's doing its own thing, and I approve. Marvel also announced at San Diego that they're doing a second wave of cosplay covers, which is cool, so long as they're, paying the cosplayers. I looked at some of the preview covers. I love that they're giving cosplayers a chance to shine because it is just a growing part of the fan base. And I think I saw some familiar faces in there, people whose pictures I've seen from previous cons and stuff. So that's very cool to me. Weird thing from Marvel. So much Marvel stuff. Weird thing from Marvel. There's going to be a Doctor Strange Punisher team-up book called Magic Bullets, which makes no sense. So I don't know if it's going to be a thing where you're like, I love it because it's so different and weird and no one would expect it. Or if it's just the bad version of following the movies and TV shows where Marvel is taking a character from a movie that's about to come out that they expect to do well, and a character from a TV show, Daredevil Season 2, that did well, and be like, we're just going to put them together because they're two names people recognize now, and they're going to try and cash in on that. So it seems like they must not be super serial about it because it's an Infinite comic, which is their digital brand. So I'm sure eventually it comes out in print, but it's digital first. So I'm a fan of both characters, especially now with the new Doctor Strange book. But I don't see the point. It doesn't seem to make sense unless they're going back to the age when Punisher was like hunting demons. He had the weird glowing mark on his forehead and was hunting demons and angels. And I think the less said about that series, the better. Unless you're a big Punisher fan and you want to talk about it, then we could talk about it. But beyond that, Marvel TV, speaking of, ABC has passed on Marvel's Most Wanted, which was supposed to be an offshoot of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that focus on Mockingbird and Hunter, whoever Hunter is. I don't know. I don't watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Supposedly, ABC is still looking at several other Marvel ideas, so don't count out a second Marvel TV show in the future. While we're talking about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Jason O'Mara, who is an actor on Terra Nova and a couple other shows, is joining the cast of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. So I don't know if that means it's going to influence the movies coming up. I would hope so because that's supposed to be the point of the show. Apparently, the character he's playing is one with ties that go back to the 40s. But, guys, Maria Hill, she was introduced in the movies. We know she's a TV actress, right? In the comic books, she's been the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., so why are we going with another, handsome McRock abs as a lead character kind of guy? It's like they're afraid or something. No, make a woman the head of S.H.I.E.L.D. We have Maria Hill. The character's already there. Stop trying to introduce new characters. I have no idea what that sound was. Moving on, though, because it's Ketchup Week, and this is what we're doing. Marvel movie news. They are no longer calling the next Avengers films Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2. It is now Infinity War and Untitled Avengers Film, which really is just the nicest title they've had thus far. I really, really dig on that. So apparently this was always a possibility of renaming the films. Anthony Russo, the writer-director who's worked with his brother on the last couple of Cap movies, including Civil War, and they're going to be tackling the next two Avengers films, say that labeling them as parts 1 and 2 was misleading from the get-go since they're completely different movies. So I'm going to guess that part 1 is going to be sort of our cinematic version of Infinity Gauntlet, where we're going to see Thanos just wipe out a ton of people. In the comic, obviously, everybody comes back. But my guess is maybe we'll actually see some permanent deaths. And then part 2 is going to be moving on from that conflict, establishing what's next for the next round of Marvel movies, and establishing what our new Avengers team is going to look like. Infinity War is set to open in May of 2018, and the sequel to that is coming in May of 2019. So whatever they want to call them, there's plenty of time for everything to change over and over again. Last bit on Marvel news is at San Diego, they introduced something called the Marvel Insider Program, where you can earn Marvel Insider loyalty rewards like comics and Marvel merchandise by signing up for this program, and then you engage with the Marvel brand on social media platforms, listening to their podcasts, watching trailers for their upcoming movies and TV shows. They'll let you check in at Marvel-sponsored events and screenings, and then also taking surveys. If you're interested in something like that, which seems kind of cool, because if you're a Marvel maniac and you're going to be doing all those things anyway, if it takes 2 taps on your phone and it leads to free comics and t-shirts or whatever, yeah, absolutely. So I will put a link in the show notes so that you guys can check that out. Not technically Marvel news, but Stan Lee news. So Stan Lee, through his own company, POW Entertainment, has put out a series of ringtones. I know my last regular episode we were talking about how he was putting out a new superhero that he wanted to turn into all sorts of marketing stuff. So now he's putting out ringtones. So it's called Stan Tones. You can check them out in Google Play or the App Store for iPhones. And it's exactly what it sounds like. So if you ever wanted a famous 92-year-old man screaming at you to pick up your phone, your dream is now a reality. Excelsior! And finally, our last little bit of news, over on Image. I can have an Image section of news. It's not all Marvel and DC, kids. Robert Kirkman, creator of The Walking Dead, has revealed that the original end of the comic book was supposed to be when the group reached Alexandria. That would mean no Negan, no Whispers, none of the current stuff that we're getting, including the short review I'm going to give you guys today on this podcast from this week's release. So clearly, I feel we got the good end of that, though I do tend to think that, in general, comics shouldn't last more than a couple of years when they tell these kind of stories, so they should always have an end in sight, especially if it's not a big 2 superhero book. Those are the books I've always been a really big fan of, where I know there's a beginning and I know there's an end, and I'm not just constantly, throwing my money at them for a month after month after month kind of stuff. So, that said, let's get into reviews of Big 2 comic books. Reviews. Let's get through these as fast as we can. Well, not as fast as we can. Let's get through these at a moderate pace, because I have 2 weeks worth of reviews to throw at you. So first is not a review, but a spoiler. So this is a spoiler for Civil War II issue 4. Like I told you guys, I'm not reading it, but I am looking at the reviews and the news that come out once it comes out. So, spoiler for this comic in 3, 2, 1. Hawkeye found not guilty of murdering Bruce Banner. Tony Stark learns that the Inhuman who is seeing the future doesn't really see the future. He just absorbs all sorts of data and predicts the most likely outcome. She-Hulk wakes up, but she is gray and has weird glowing lines all over her, so who knows if that's her new appearance. Everybody lines up to fight at the end of the book, and Captain Marvel reveals that she has called in the Guardians of the Galaxy. And that, in a nutshell, is what's happening on Civil War II. Okay, Mighty Thor number 9. Thor, the female Thor, Jane Foster, is fighting Silver Samurai in this book in an attempt to save the book's big bad, since he's the only one who can stop a giant bomb. Gee whiz, Thor dealing with a giant bomb. Why does that sound familiar? I'm saying that because the second arc of Thor God of Thunder was the God Bomb, and it was awesome, an awesome read. But so it's very possible Jason Aaron's returning to the well here. But either way, it wasn't an amazing read in this one. I wasn't like, oh, what a great comic issue. But it was entertaining enough to keep me reading until the next issue. And mostly, I just like that for a Marvel book in particular, it's insular, and I don't need to read every other Marvel book just so I know what's going on here. And if you ever listen to my podcast, you know that that's a recurring thing for me. I like my books with a beginning and an end, at least to the arcs, and I like it when it's insular and I don't need to try and know everything or read 18 other books to know what's going on. Hal Jordan and the GL Corps #1, or it's the Green Lantern Corps, I'm just calling it GL Corps. So Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps #1. Nice to kind of get back to business as usual here, to see Hal back as a Green Lantern, doing Green Lantern sort of things. I thought Saranic Natu looked kind of weird. I like that in this one she's drawn to not have that typical comic book sort of female body, you know, where it's incredibly small waist and incredibly big everything else. But I did think just her face, the way it was drawn, looked kind of weird. And this is just me. This is a thing I have with Green Lantern books, and this character in particular. The character of Arkillo, the giant monster-looking yellow lantern. Didn't he lose his fingers? And, like, at one time, didn't he lose his tongue? Like, I can never keep track of the damage that's done to all of these different lanterns and all these different cores. But with this character in particular, I feel like he always seems to just get pieces back that were removed at some point. Because he was always the guy who would challenge whoever was leading the Sinestro Corps and then get mutilated somehow. So in this one, he seems to have his full body back. I know I want to say he's had his tongue back for a while, but he's got his hand back too. It bothers me that there's so many inconsistencies, and that's on the editorial team. That said, I like Hal's attitude of this lone Green Lantern against the whole wave of Sinestro Corps, but he's not going to go it alone, because at the end of this issue, this isn't really a spoiler. We knew it was going to happen. The lanterns that were left surviving, the last surviving lanterns from the Edge of Oblivion miniseries, have now returned to our universe. So here's what I want to see. Jeff Johns did a thing where in like a secret Files and Origins or something issue, we got introduced very specifically to a number of lanterns from each corps. And then we would see those lanterns around the comics. I say do this again and then get strict editorially about their appearances, what it is they're up to, and their particular characteristics, so it's not confusing for those of us that are big ongoing Green Lantern fans. Moving over to Harley Quinn #30. It was the last issue before they did the whole rebirth thing, so I decided to stick with it through this issue, but that's it. I'm jumping off. The issue is fine. If you're a fan of the Harley Quinn series, it wasn't a bad read. It was just kind of more of the same. So it's a good example of the run overall, but it didn't do it for me in the end. So even though it's like the one DC book where the entire creative team is moving over to the next volume, I am done with Harley Quinn for now. Finally, for this particular week, before we move on to this week, boy, I'm not saying that well. So this is last week I'm reviewing before moving into this week, was Wonder Woman #3. Still really digging the art in this book. Greg Rucka is doing this thing where this story in issue 3 picks up from the end of issue #1, with Wonder Woman going to Cheetah, normally her arch nemesis, and asking her for help in finding the location of Themyscira, a.k.a. Paradise Island, a.k.a. the home of the Amazons. And then we have a secondary story following Steve Trevor. So Steve Trevor and crew, as they're trying to find a group of kidnapped girls in the same area as Wonder Woman is currently in, and then they wind up in trouble. So what I like here is that there wasn't a physical fight between Wonder Woman and Cheetah. It was just Wonder Woman continually asking for her help and then offering her own help, despite the fact that Cheetah absolutely despises her. This is the difference between Wonder Woman and, like, a Batman character who would just try to frighten the villain into helping or immediately dive in and start punching. I like that take on the character, and it's Greg Rucka, so like I said, I'm in it at least for the first arc. Now, let's move on to this week in comics. I'm going to start with the indies, starting with Paper Girls #8. The short version is that things are kind of starting to come together. And at the same time, they're continually bringing up even more questions. But I'm still digging it. The art is pitch perfect. The writing is great. I have no idea where this book is going. So you have to pick it up from the beginning. This isn't one you can just grab a random issue of. I feel like this must be what it was like watching Lost, where every episode you're like, oh, that's so cool, and you want to explain it to somebody, but if they haven't watched the show from the beginning, you really can't. So that's Paper Girls. It's a good read, but, you'd have to start it from the beginning. Walking Dead 157. Things are about to get real here, kids. And it looks like Negan might actually be fighting on the side of the Angels this time. But probably not, because it's Negan and that's his thing. So this is the first issue of the new big, what do they call it? The Whisperer War, I think. And it looks like, I want to say, I'm doing this off of memory here. I want to say it was a 6-issue, or is going to be a 6-issue arc. So this is issue 1 of that. So we're just starting to get into things. In normal Kirkman style, this issue features a lot of conversations as people sort of get their emotions out of the way, and it lays the ground for what's coming. It's Walking Dead, so I'm not ever going to put this book down until it's over, or until something gets really, really bad. It's never not a good read. Moving over to Marvel, Doctor Strange number 10. This is the conclusion to this opening arc, and I kind of like where the story ends. Spoilers, 3, 2, 1. They managed to defeat the Empirical, the big bad of the first arc, but magic is still absent from the world. It was all taken away by the Empirical, and they used the last shreds of it to try and fight him and defeat him. So now, we got nothing. I will say that I'm not as big a fan of this one as I was of Jason Aaron's opening arcs of Thor, God of Thunder, which I've already actually talked about this week. But I think I'm still going to stick around. I liked it well enough, and I trust Jason Aaron's writing. I like the way that he sort of lays the groundwork for a longer arc, or rather, he'll lay the groundwork for more stories to come and still then tells in solid arcs so that you can jump on or jump off as needed. I expect I'll stick around to see where this one goes, at least until, and I don't know this, I'm just assuming, the book is going to totally reboot when the movie launches so that it looks like the movie. I could be wrong. Maybe they'll let him keep going because it's a good book. It's a good read. I just don't trust the movie machine to leave a comic alone. Last one for Marvel is Moon Knight number 5, and what a wonderful, trippy read. This was also the end of a first arc, and it seems, you never know with Moon Knight, but it seems like they're going to explain sort of the disjoint between this volume, the previous volume, and then the volume before that, where Mark Spector was in Los Angeles producing a movie kind of sort of based on his own, a TV show kind of sort of based on his own life. I love this. I love how everyone gets to do their own take on Mark Spector and make everything crazy and ridiculous, and I totally look forward to seeing where this book takes me. Like, more comics like this in mainstream superhero publishing, please. Last one for this week, and so the last of our reviews is Green Lanterns number 4. I'm still on board with this one. I like how they're doing the interaction still between the two characters. In this one, again, we're seeing how Jessica Cruz, the female Green Lantern, is really having issues trusting herself. She gets infected by the Red Lanterns, and so it's up to Simon Baz to help her out of that. And then she's dealing with the insecurities that she feels because of that. And that I like. I really, really like that. I love the fact, again, and I know I talk about this every time with a Green Lanterns issue, but it's you're qualified to do the job, but it doesn't mean you're going to be great at it right out of the box. And I like that. I like that we have two characters that are trying to deal with that because it makes them more relatable. The same way Kyle Rayner was more relatable because he was just a guy who was handed the ring and could do amazing things because he had an amazing imagination, like, say, the comic book readers that were reading the comic. There's why it was relatable. But he was also struggling with it. So I like the return of those sort of themes in a Green Lantern book, especially dealing with rookies. So yay for where Green Lantern is right now. And that is it for reviews, I think. Still no Planetary. I'm working on it. I swear I am. I'm going to get my hands on at least the first volume of Planetary. I hope by next week. Other things that I read that I've totally reviewed in the past or will not talk about in depth here is I ordered a couple of trades and they came in, so I reread volumes 1 through 4 of Greg Rucka's Lazarus, which I love. Go read. And then also I read Harry Potter the Cursed Child, the stage play script that was released. I read that as an ebook. But this is a comic book podcast, son. So if you want my opinions on Harry Potter, which I love all things Harry Potter, but I may have some opinions on this one, maybe. If you want opinions on that, since it's not a comic book, hit me up on Twitter. I was actually talking with Void about it the other day, so you'll already see a couple initial comments from me on there. Shall we move on to the poll list in the archives? I think we shall. Let's do it now. Bop doop doo dop doon doon dop rap bop bida boom ba doom bop bida zap bop bida 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 bop bida blah 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 blah. Poll list and archives. You know, really would almost make sense to do like the weird mouth noises at the beginning of the show, and then in between the other blocks be like, meanwhile on the poll list. You know, because like that's how it was on the Super Friends cartoon. Oh man. Ow, and if I can get that sound effect and put that sound effect on there, all right, that's probably happening next week. This has nothing to do with what's going on. Poll list. Here's what's coming next week. Only 2 comics, and that's so nice because then I can try and hunt down Planetary. I am reading Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps #2 and Wonder Woman 4, and that is it. I got nothing from Marvel next week. I got nothing from Image next week. Just 2 simple, ongoing DC comics. So, awesome. That way I can actually have a topic of the week or get another co-host in here, and I don't need to spend all of my time just playing Ketchup. Though we all love Ketchup. Ketchup and mayonnaise. Archives. Here's what I am going to suggest you guys go out and pick up. It's a series of comics called Generations, and I might have mentioned this previously on the podcast. I also just recently picked up one of these because I was missing one, so now I have a complete run. This is a series of short graphic novels which are combined as a collection for each run. I should start over. Generations is 3 different series. The first one was very popular, so they did a Generations 2, and then they did a Generations 3. So the first 2 volumes, if you will, are in 4 sort of short trades, and then Generations 3 was a multi-issue, regular comic book issue miniseries. So I know that the first 2 you can get as a thick trade, 1 for each, and then I don't know if there are trades out there for Generations 3. Here's the premise. What these comics do is posit a world where Batman and Superman first appeared when they were first published and then aged in real time. So each one of these books jumps around between different decades. So as Superman and Batman get older, you start seeing their kids, their grandkids, etc., as sort of the Batman and Superman families grow. And then eventually they start introducing, Green Lanterns and Cyborg even. But it's mainly just focused on Batman and Superman. And I love that idea. So if that's the kind of thing that you dig, and really it's a fun book, series of books, volumes of series of books. I enjoy Generations. So that is my archive pick for this week. If you have an archive pick, something you think I should read or that people enjoy that you know is already out there in completion, shoot me a message, let me know, and we'll include it in the archives. And that is it. Oh, voice break. Okay, good enough. I told you this was the catch-up episode, you guys. I'm tired. So tired. Gonna go have a root beer float. Why? Because everybody likes root beer floats. All right, off topic. Maybe going a little crazy. So that is it for this week, guys. That is it. No topic of the week. I decided I had far too much news and 2 weeks worth of reviews, and boy, that is good enough for this episode. So please, if you enjoy this, normally, not this crazy ranting version of me, if you enjoy the Comic Box, please, leave me a star rating and or a review on iTunes. That is the best way to share it with other people. That is a great way to let me know how you think I'm doing. You can also hit me up on Twitter at Knowby, so that is at KNOWBY, or you can flat out shoot me an email at thecomicboxpodcast. So the is in there, thecomicboxpodcast at gmail.com. And of course, this is part of the Geek to Geek Podcast Network. So head over to geektogeekcast.net and you can sign up for updates on all of the great Geek to Geek podcast shows. And they are awesome. I enjoy them. I listen to them all the time, and so should you. So that is it. How am I doing on time? Oh boy, it's like totally the length of a normal episode. Good, that means I did a good job. Okay, so this is me, this is Rob, your friendly neighborhood comic geek, closing the comic box. And next week I only have 2 comics to read. That's so nice. I'm going to try and get somebody to do it with me then. I'm going to work up something. I'm going to have something really cool for you guys. I don't know what it is yet, but oh man, you are going to be so excited when you find out what it is after I find out what it's going to be. Thanks again, everybody, and we will see you next week. Wow, comic box, do. Lots of reviews, do. Lots of news, do. Gonna have something really cool for you guys next week. Wow. This is the place where I normally say a thing.